Hi there, my name is FixFox, and welcome to Heroes of Might and Magic 2, the F Edition. Uh, Tell you what, this is a quick break from the Roland campaign. I had some homework from the last scenario that we just played. I had a situation where I had 7 phoenixes, and they were blessed, and we had some extra good stats on my hero. They took a swipe at 4 dragons. As they took the swipe, they got good luck, and somehow 7 phoenixes did 952 damage. 7 phoenixes did 952 damage. How does that work? I have phoenixes who do between 20 and 40 damage. How did 7 phoenixes do 952 damage? And my homework was to figure out, okay, how in the world does damage actually work in Heroes of Might and Magic 2? That is the answer that brought me down this rabbit hole. I've been to the wikis for Heroes of Might and Magic 2 and 3 because some of the answers were not in the Heroes 2 wiki. And it also brought me here to the manual. I wanted to point out a few things in the Heroes of Might and Magic 2 manual very quickly as I'm building up to the question of how in the world do 7 phoenixes do 952 damage. So let's go through this really quickly. The very first thing I want to point out is that this was re-updated in 2001. The version of this manual, though the game came out in 1996, this is when it was republished or re-released. This is the original manual. And I gotta give a shout out for town themes that were composed and conducted by Paul Romero. Sir, wherever you are, this game's sound is beautiful. I've already been playing it for a couple of hours, and the sound is not grating on me. It is not annoying. This is absolutely masterful work. Well done. Bravo. And then moving on into the manual, I wanted to point out really quickly that in the spells section, I had forgotten that in Heroes of Might and Magic 1, spells worked completely different. And there was an absolute overhaul in the way that they work in Heroes of Might and Magic 2. Heroes of Might and Magic 1, when you visited a mage guild, when you visited a shrine to pick up a spell, however much knowledge you had, that's how many casts of that spell you had before you had to go back to re-remember or relearn that spell. What a terrible system. I can understand that for balance purposes, it makes it so spells are more of a resource that you have to invest in, you have to maintain, but how annoying would that be to have to function on something other than mana, other than spell points, and go back to your main castle all the time with your primary hero just to learn that 5th level spell that you've really wanted to get for a long time. What a good change. Just nice to see that they were aware of some of these major changes. Let's see. Couple of other things that were interesting in this manual. The tutorial, I read through the entire tutorial, and in fact I played the tutorial, and I was happy to see that I didn't lead you too far of astray. I know I've been very, very detailed in my analysis and explanations for the Roland campaigns thus far. I know that that's going to drop off because if you've been with me so far, you're going to understand a lot of the mechanics just as I've been explaining them, but it's nice to see that I didn't forget anything. There was a lot of information here that is right on the money that I already was able to convey to you. So it was a little bit of I was a little bit proud. Okay, I did a pretty good job. I was explaining this in a pretty good way. Thank you. Way to go, me. Let's see. There's not a whole lot of information here that was important. At some point, there's going to be a campaign that we're going to have to use some of these adventure options more often. We haven't gotten to these yet. That was on purpose. We will talk about them once we get to them on a relevant map. The system options, this is much different in the F Heroes edition. Worth noting that it's nice to remember that, things used to be very limited, and the F Heroes edition has brought a lot of that back into modern day compliance. This was important to me. Adventurous heroes will find many special locations to visit. Locations stay on the map, offering their benefits to whomever reaches them. And then they break up the adventure map. I've been calling them points of interest or tourist attractions. they separate them into 4 basic categories. Terrain objects, these are mountains, these are trees, these are things that just provide structure to the map. Single visit sites, these sites can be visited once. Depending on the site, that means 1 visit per hero, like a gazebo, 1 visit per player, like an obelisk, which we will get to, or 1 visit per game, like the demon cave that we went to. After I went to the demon cave, the enemy hero couldn't go into the demon cave and interact with it. It had been used once, single use, and done. What a great distinction from multiple visit sites. These are sites that can be visited multiple times and never go away. Some of these sites can be visited only once per week, like the windmill. Some offer creatures which replenish on the first day of the week, like huts. And some can be visited multiple times with no restrictions. That would be an example of like a fairy ring, or something that can modify your luck or your morale. You could visit it, fight a battle, go back to it, and get the buff again in the very same turn. A multiple visit site. And then the 4th way that they separate the locations on the map would be a continual site. And these are your mills, your mines, lighthouses, things that you flag and maintain. With control to them, they offer a bonus throughout the game. Okay. A new thing that I had also was unaware of that I learned that I wanted to share with you, diplomacy. I was very offended when I had basic diplomacy and 10 out of 50 archers had offered to join me. Well, 10 out of 40 archers offered to join me for 5,800 gold. And I said, what in the world is going on? I didn't realize how it worked here in Heroes of Might and Magic 2. The cost is always based on the total number of creatures in the army camp. That number is static depending on the creatures in that camp. And of course, from week to week, neutral creatures will increase their rank slowly but surely. I think it's like around 14% on a week-to-week basis. Neutral creatures will get stronger. But with diplomacy, you're always going to pay the full price. But with basic, you're only going to get 25% of the army. At advanced, you're going to get 50% of the army. And at expert, you're going to get 100% of the troops. So, broken, busted. All I can say is that 10 archers for 5,800 gold looks a lot worse than 40 archers for 5,800 gold. Just saying. There's a lot more uses for diplomacy, but you really got to get that diplomacy rolling. Town screen. Again, I didn't lead you too far astray there. Everything was working pretty well. This was interesting to me. I didn't know a good way of expressing it at the time. I had balked at the fact that upgrading from a paladin to a crusader was so expensive. I think I upgraded 4 of them. The difference in cost between a paladin and a crusader is 400 gold. It's 600 to recruit the paladin, 600 gold, and 1,000 gold to recruit the crusader. And I balked at the cost. But the cost is always static. It's double the difference in price between the upgraded and the non-upgraded version. So, yeah, that's 400 gold times 4 at 1,600, and then double that. So, yeah, that's why it takes 3,200 gold to update your paladins from paladins to crusaders. And all the more reason why it's important to consider, do I buy a lower tier creature, knowing that I need the troops now, but I do plan on upgrading them later? That's gonna be a very important tactical decision, always. Let's see. Mage Guild, I explained that very well. I did like this, and I missed this. The tavern is not available in the Necromancer Castle. Undead don't get thirsty. In the Price of Loyalty expansion, a building is added to the Necromancers that replaces the tavern, and it's a fantastic building. We'll talk about that once we get into the campaigns that are related to the expansion. Let's see. All these other buildings, there's nothing special about them per se. Really quickly with the special buildings, I've mentioned that each faction has their own special building or effect that can be built in the town. But seeing them all side by side is nice because then we can kind of do a little bit of a ranking in our mind. So I'm just going to read them and you think about where you'd like to rank these. Knights get fortification to the castle walls, making it so it takes more shots from the catapult to bring down a wall or a turret. The barbarians can build an arena, giving garrison troops higher morale. The sorceress can create a rainbow over the town, adding luck to defenders. The warlock builds a dungeon and generates 500 additional gold in income for that castle. Necromancers get the perpetual storm, and that's a +2 spell power for defenders. And wizards construct a library to give us 1 extra spell per level of the Mage Guild. So if you had to rank these in your mind, what would be the most powerful? For me, I'm thinking that the library is still the most important and most impactful because the use is so incredible. You spend all the resources to upgrade your Mage Guild to level 5, and then instead of having just 1 option at a 5th level spell, you got 2. You got 2. That is so valuable. It's not gonna. It's a late game benefit. It's not really going to kick in to its fullest extent until you're into like a level 3 Mage Guild or a level 4 or the level 5. And so you're not going to get the immediate benefit like, say, the knights with their fortifications for their castle walls. That can come in handy, day 3. But the use just feels so much higher to me. To me, that the library is S tier. If I had to rank the second one, I would say it would go for me wizards with the library, warlocks with the dungeons, an extra 500 gold is just amazing. Probably then the knights with their fortifications. Then I would say it would be the necromancers with the +2 spell power for defenders. I think the +2 spell power is better than additional morale or additional luck. And I would say that of morale or luck, I would always rather have morale. So sorceresses come in dead last and barbarians come 5th, with the necromancers at the 4th slot. The knights with the 3rd best special building, warlocks with the 2nd best, and then again, I submit to you that the library is the best special building amongst all the factions. Okay, let me continue. Let's move on. Some of this doesn't really matter. Well, I mean, it matters. I'm just saying. Okay. This kind of blew my mind a little bit. I'm sorry, this is going to be a long video and I'm really trying to shorten it. This is the second time I've done this video, but it's got to be said. I knew in my heart of hearts, and I would have noticed if things weren't exactly the way that they've always been, but I knew in my heart of hearts something that had to be shown to me in this table to really understand. Each type of unit, each class of hero starts off with the same stats. Part of me knew that, and part of me just saw the picture and the portrait and somehow didn't equate and just never noticed. Barbarians will always start with +3 attack and +1 defense. All the time. All the time. They are always going to start with advanced pathfinding. All the time. Knights are a +2 attack, +2 defense. For both the barbarians and the knights, you can't have less than 1 spell power and you can't have less than 1 knowledge, but you'll look for the magical classes. They can absolutely have 0 attack and 0 defense. They just don't have a bonus there. But spell power and knowledge work a little bit different, to where even though barbarians and knights don't really specialize in magic, they still have to have some statistic there just to make the game function. Let's see. Knights are always going to start with ballistics and leadership. Necromancers are going to have 1 attack, 2 spell power, 2 knowledge. They're going to have wisdom. They're going to have necromancy and haste in their spell book. Sorceresses are going to have +2 power, +3 knowledge. They'll have wisdom. They'll have navigation, and they'll have bless in their spell books. Warlocks are going to be +3 spell power, so more spell power than the sorceresses. In fact, flipped from sorceresses. More spell power, less knowledge. They'll always have scouting, always have the wisdom, and they start with curse. And the wizards are a mix of all this. They have the defense skill to start off with, so their units are always going to be a little tankier, and they're just going to have a good mix of spell power and of knowledge with the stone skin ability. Now, this is where this really comes into play with classes and the heroes that add flavor to this game. We're going to start off right here with skill advancement. Every class of hero has a greater propensity for certain primary skills. Again, in my heart of hearts, I totally knew that. I totally knew that. But to see the math in front of me absolutely blows me away. Between levels 2 and 9, everything is very specialized from every class. It's very specialized in certain things that they do best. After level 9, it opens up. It becomes a lot more general. But to really help the classes and the factions maintain their identities and their roles, when they level up, they're going to get a higher propensity for certain primary skills. For example, barbarians, they only have a 5% chance at knowledge or power. If you see a barbarian that gets a +1 to their knowledge early on, all of a sudden they've got 20 spell power. That's gigantic, gigantic for a barbarian. Or +2 spell power. That's huge. It's so rare that it happens, but it can be absolutely game changing in the way that they approach combat. So impressive to just realize that, yeah, 55% of the time they're going to get a +1 to attack, 35% of the time +1 to defense. And if you get power or knowledge, thank your lucky stars and don't ask questions, just take it. So what you can read from this graph is that in the early levels, barbarians are mostly attack, a little bit of defense. Knights are mostly defense, a little bit of attack. Necromancers are mostly power and knowledge, but decent chances at attack and defense. Sorceresses, mostly knowledge. Warlocks, mostly spell power. And wizards are a good mix of power and knowledge. Interesting to note. After everything levels up, the most even-keeled heroes are the knights. They got a 25% chance at everything. 1 out of 4 for everything. Necromancers are the same. Everybody else still will favor a certain type of statistic, and they're more likely to get that one. So knights are mostly general. Necromancers are mostly general. Just interesting stuff to think about when you're doing your hero. Okay. One other thing that I knew in my heart of hearts, but is worth focusing on, is that the hero secondary skills. You can have 8 on any hero at any given time. For some reason, it didn't strike me that there's only 14 secondary skills. In any given game, you're only going to be missing out on like 6. And that's so weird to me. That's so weird to me because even though you don't get every skill for every hero all the time, it really feels like a heavy choice when you're picking these secondary skills. And for the most part, you're going to get just about everything every time, or so it would appear. And that takes us into this section. For skill advancement, you have a greater propensity to get certain secondary skills depending on what class of hero you are. Again, my heart of hearts knew that, but to see it here laid out for me is crazy. For example, I had mentioned in an earlier recording that necromancers were the only ones who could get the necromancy skill. And the way that you read this map is that a 5 is the highest chance you have of getting a skill available to learn, and a 0 means no chance at all. A 1 means there's some chance, but it's very, very low. Who has a chance of getting necromancy? Barbarians have no chance. Knights have no chance. Necromancers, they start with it. They're getting necromancy, no problem. Sorceresses have none. And warlocks are the only other class of hero that can get necromancy. And it does happen. I've seen it happen. It's happened to me. It's just so interesting when it does happen that this primarily class-specific skill can also be learned occasionally by warlock heroes. And it's also interesting because, for example, I want to just point this out. This one really struck me hard. Wizards are the faction that have the most shooters in the faction. They have the level 1 halflings, they have the level 5 magi and archmages, and then they have the titans, the upgraded level 6 version. They're tied for the lowest chance of getting archery as a secondary skill. The game is in some sense balanced around the fact that, like, yeah, you can get archery for your main starting wizarding hero, but it's not that likely. You would be better off getting a barbarian hero or a sorceress hero to lead your army if you're a wizard, if you're planning on just staying true to your faction and keeping just your faction's units, because they have the greatest chance of getting archery and then getting that sweet 50% bonus damage through the expert archery. Crazy. Crazy. I never would have made that connection. I'm not gonna run through all of these. Those were just the two best examples that I could think of. I just want to point out that nobody likes Eagle Eye. Some of these skills, it's a very low chance of getting regardless of who you are. For example, luck. We got ones, we got mostly ones, a couple twos, and 1 3. Luck is fairly rare. It's not that highly sought after anyway. The most common skill, if I'm looking at this right, give me just half a second. Where is it? Is pathfinding. Pathfinding is the most likely skill that anybody can get. If you just look at the raw numbers and average it out, pathfinding across all classes is the most likely skill you're going to get. And it's almost tied with logistics, but not quite. Interesting. Okay. Speaking of just movement, I'd already talked about this. I'll just cover it real briefly. The different types of terrain. There's one terrain that we haven't come across yet in the campaigns. We've come across there's two. We haven't come across desert yet. We've seen lots of swamp. We've seen snow. We just saw, it's called cracked here, but it's wasteland is what it's referred to as in the game. It's the kind of orangish terrain. It was in the very center of Roland Campaign number 4. We haven't seen beach yet because we haven't had a lot of beach and water activities, but we will. Lava we found for the first time just recently. Water, dirt, grass, and road. This just lays out, if without pathfinding, here's the penalty. I thought it was 2.25 for desert. It's just double the amount of movement points it takes to walk through desert as opposed to lava or dirt or grass. But the game does a good job pointing out here that you get the 25% bonus movement while traveling on a road. So, of course, traveling on a road through a desert or through a swamp or through snow is usually a very good idea because you're just going to be blazing through that where other people are going to get slowed way, way down. Let's see. Kingdom overview stats. Okay, we are getting there. I promised you that the whole reason why I started this video was going to be revolving around damage and answering the question of how 7 Phoenixes did 952 damage. We're getting there right now. So thank you for sticking with me. I'm geeking out a little bit. Let me start by just reading this. I'm going to read it slow. Be patient with me. The total damage a creature inflicts is the base damage of the creature multiplied by the number of the creatures attacking. This is modified by the difference between the attacking creature's attack skill and the defending creature's defense skill. Each point of attack over defense gives an additional 10% extra damage. For example, if I'm 1 point of attack over defense, I get 110% damage. If I have 5 extra attack over defense, I get an additional 150% damage, to a maximum of 3 times the damage. Each point of defense over attack reduces the damage taken by 5%. So if my defense is 1 higher over somebody's attack, then they're going to do 95% damage. If my defense is 5 times greater than their attack, I'm going to take only 75% damage. And this can be reduced all the way down to a minimum of 30% damage. The final damage is subtracted from the defender's hit points, resulting in the number of creatures killed. Damage carries over from turn to turn. I don't know what that last sentence means, actually. Damage carries over from turn to turn. That one's a little unclear to me. Here's my point. I've really done might a disservice in this game. I've talked about how, this is Heroes of Might and Magic, and just kind of rolled my eyes a little bit here, thinking that the spells are absolutely the end-all be-all, and then the might factions and the might in general is just, it's kind of lackluster. That was my feeling before this, but now I understand. Now I get it. Now I'm seeing the math here. It's multiplicative on top of the stacks that you're already multiplying. When we're dealing with a multiplicative table of numbers, things can get really crazy really quick with every little bit of extra attack or every little bit of extra defense. in a big, big way, especially as we get to end games where the stacks are already so huge, or we have very high tier creatures who have a very high effect size. Let's get into the example that they give. Say that 3 rocks, who are, in my opinion, probably the most balanced unit in the game. That's probably why they use them. They have a 7 attack and a 7 defense. They do 4 to 8 damage. They are attacking 5 pikemen. The pikemen have 5 attack and 9 defense, and 3 to 4 damage, 15 hit points, etc. In this instance, and I'll get into something very, very briefly in a second, the rocks do an average of 6 points of damage each. This is just the average. Between 4 to 8 damage, you can plan on getting an average of about 6 damage. It's going to go up sometimes, it'll go down sometimes. I'll explain how that works. But their average damage of 6 is multiplied by 3. That's the number of rocks in the stack. That's a total of 18 points of damage. The defense of the pikemen, however, is 2 above the attack of the rocks, because pikemen have 9 defense and the rocks only have 7 attack. So it's 5% for each point of defense over the attack that a creature is defending on. And so the pikemen are going to be taking 10% reduced damage because they're 2 points above, 5%, 5%. They're going to take 10% damage less out of that 18 points of damage. So it reduces it from 18 points of damage down to 16. That kills 1 pikeman because pikemen have only 15 hit points. And then they damage the extra pikeman on the new top of the stack by 1 point. And he has 14 hit points left. Okay. All of a sudden, though, at this effect size, it doesn't look like it makes a big difference. You're like, okay, so the rocks lost 2 damage. Who cares? Okay. Well, let me give you the example that brought us here in the first place. Phoenixes have 12 attack. Green dragons have 12 defense. After all the bonuses and multipliers were done, I went from 12 attack on my Phoenixes to 21. I had that much might. 12 to 21. Not quite doubled, but a ton extra attack. Whereas the dragons were only defending at a +2 from 12 defense up to 14. So that is 7 additional attack over the defense of the green dragons. That's an extra bonus 70% damage. Now, on top of this, these 7 Phoenixes had 2 other things going for them. It was the perfect attack. 7 Phoenixes, 952 damage, because they get an extra 70% bonus damage because their attack skill is so high, and because I blessed them, so they're not doing an average between 20 and 40 damage. They're doing 40 damage each. Okay, that sounds great. And also they got good luck. And the good luck modifier is double damage. 7 Phoenixes, doing the math, got us up to about 460 some damage. And then we got double damage with the good luck. And it just shot it right up. Wow. Multiplicative on top of multiplicative. I ain't good at PEMDAS, but this is making sense to me. And hopefully it's making sense to you. If all you're hearing is numbers right now, just know that when we get, again, either huge stacks of creatures or we get very high level creatures who have large gaps or large either large effect sizes with their attack or defense, or large effect sizes with the range of damage that they can do, just know that we can multiply the large stacks and we can multiply the large effect sizes, and we can make some magical things happen. Things that rival or decimate what magic can do. Absolutely stoked. Absolutely stoked. Okay. Alrighty. Hopefully this is making sense, because it's kind of exciting to me. And by the way, I had to go through lots of wikis online. I had to go through like Heroes of Might and Magic 2 forums from like 8 years ago, just so I could make sure that I had this down and I wasn't leaving anything out. Okay. Going through the manual, I'm not going to talk about these spells, and I'm going to kind of scroll through it a little bit quicker. I'd like to go over these spells individually as we come across them. It kind of keeps some of the magic here. If you know everything that's in the game, that might not be as nifty. Real quick, the different factions. The manual gives a brief synopsis of what they believe the creatures or the strengths and weaknesses of that faction to be. I'm just going to read those real quick. I'm not going to get into the creatures themselves per se. I'll get into one for each faction from the lens of looking at attack and defense skill and how that affects their role on the battlefield. So the manual states that barbarian creatures are generally slow but have high attack skills and hit points. While excellent in the early and mid game, the barbarian creatures begin to falter towards the end game. The early game advantage is accented in small and medium maps. We know this to be true. Let's look at the wolf. What have I said before? I've said that the wolf is very strong attacking, but they're very fragile, hard to keep a power stack because they're so fast. They often go forward and just get swallowed up by everybody else. Okay, in the lens of looking at attack and defense, wolves have 6 attack and 2 defense. Now, if these wolves, say, are attacking a stack of goblins with 1 defense, they're going to get a 50% multiplier against this lame stack of goblins with only 1 defense. And so you can see very quickly that having 50% times 2, because they have 2 attacks, wolves can get nuts really, really quickly. They're fast, they attack early, and they're going to do some they're going to do some damage there. But on the flip side, you attack the wolves with their 2 defense, there's a good chance that most units are going to get a good multiplier. In fact, goblins with their 3 attack against their own creature, the wolves with the 2 defense, the goblins are now going to get the 10% bonus to their attack. It'll still be low, but they're a solid pack of creatures, and generally you get goblins who swarm because you'll get stacks of 50, 60 goblins, and off you go with that. Okay, so barbarians, the manual is saying, yep, they're good in the early game. You can get their creatures pretty early, and they're best in small and medium maps. I feel like I said that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like I did. Night creatures have high defense skills, and at the upper levels are fairly fast. Like the barbarian, however, the night creatures are best in the early and mid game. In the end game, the best success will be fighting against the sorceress or the necromancer. Small and medium maps allow the knights to press his early game advantage. I thought that was interesting that it specifically said sorceresses and necromancers in the late game. Yeah, knights can do okay against. But they're saying that, look, in a long game, late game, you're going to find that wizards and the warlocks are just going to overwhelm you with their superior top tier creatures. That's just known to be true. It's nice to hear that the manual and the developers of the game also just knew that to be true. That wasn't some kind of oversight. They knew that. And again, they're saying, let's snowball this in the early and the mid game and go from there. Let's see. Let's take the pikeman. I think that I've been sleeping on the pikeman so hard for a tier 3 creature. I may never upgrade pikemen again. It's only 50 gold, and you do get an extra 5 hit points per, and you do get the speed bonus, but it's not going to kill me. If I have to choose between upgrading some other unit and pikemen, I'm going to choose some other unit from here on out. Their value in the high defense doesn't really change if you upgrade them or not. You don't get them for their damage. You get them for their ability to take a hit and keep on going. Now, of course, that is tied to hit points. Going from 15 to 20, I mean that's a 33% increase from 15 to 20. But all the same, they are usually going to be the last creature in battle, because say you take a high attack damage thing. I've been sleeping on champions too, by the way, because they have an attack of 10. Champions are usually going to have big modifiers, big bonuses against a lot of troops. But again, against the pikemen, they're only going to get like a plus 10 because they're only going to have 1 additional attack over the 9 defense of the pikeman. And that's just interesting to me. Very interesting to me. Okay, Necromancer creatures. While weak at the low levels, they become much more powerful at the high levels. The Necromancer is weak in the early game, but strong in the mid and end game. Larger maps give Necromancers time to develop higher level creatures. All Necromancer units and ghosts are undead and therefore immune to mind-affecting spells, bless and curse, and are always neutral morale. This surprised the crap out of me. I didn't realize how weak the zombies were. They have 2 defense. Everybody is getting major bonus damage against zombies every single darn time. I knew that they were a bad unit. I didn't realize how bad. They are serviceable on attack, sure. But you hit a stack of zombies, they're going down. These are not like tank fodder. That's not what their job is. Their job is to try and get some attacks off early. Heck, you'd rather have skeletons with 3 defense taking most hits. You really would. The only issue being that, of course, 4 hit points, you're going to lose comparatively more. But as far as just from the basic defense stat, wow, such a weak unit. And I got to point this out because this blew my mind. Power Liches, highest defense stat on any shooter in the game at 13. Who has got more than 13 defense or 13 attack? Bone Dragons don't. Like dragons, I think start at 12, like green dragons. The paladins I know start at 11. 13 defense. Power Liches are gonna take a hit. Their damage isn't ridiculous, but they are gonna take a hit. Sorceress creatures are generally very fast but have low HP. Weak in the early game and moderate at best in the end game, the sorceress creatures are the best in the mid game. Their combo of speed, flying, and range becomes incredibly potent. Medium maps are perfect for sorceress creatures. I agree with everything that they just said there. And in fact, I lamented that the unicorn has only 40 hit points as the 5th level creature. Now that I understand a little bit more about the way that attack works, though, for this unicorn unit, having an attack of 10 as a 5th level creature is actually really not bad. And being able to bless the unicorns makes them very formidable indeed. So I was thinking, oh man, I really need some fodder to stop my elves, grand elves, druids, or greater druids from getting damaged. Wouldn't a 5th level tank type creature be wonderful here? No. Sorceresses are built off of hitting hard and hitting first. They're like the barbarians at that, and they do the same basic role. They just do it at higher tiers. They just do it more in the mid game and the late game, like 3 to 4 weeks in, as opposed to week 1 and week 2. So the low hit points is actually kind of by design. Interesting. The Warlocks units are slow and expensive, but they have high hit points and good attack and defense skills. They're poor in the mid game. Warlocks creatures are effective in the early game and show their true colors in the end game, where dragons rule the battlefield. Warlocks can have success on small maps, but generally do better on large maps where they have time to develop their dragons. Absolutely, because dragons do rule the battlefield. The unit I want to really highlight here is actually the Minotaur. I had no idea. These are the only units in the game, as far as I'm aware, that when you upgrade them, they go from average speed to very fast. They get like +3 speed when you upgrade them. They go from 4 hex movement to 7. That's nuts. I had no idea. For 100 extra gold, one of the best things you can do. Plus you get the extra, the extra tankiness. You don't even have to get any increased damage stats. They're going to get across the map quicker. They're going to attack first, and they can take more hits so they can keep on trucking. I had no idea that the Minotaur Kings were that good. Interesting. And then lastly, the Wizards. Wizard creatures have a little of everything. Some toughness, some speed, some range, and some strike ability. Like the Necromancer, the Wizard is weak in the early game, strong in the mid game, and challenges the Warlock for end-game power. Titans and Archmages are the best range strike creatures around, and Titans match up to Dragons in power. Between the Archmages, I've been saying for a long time that Archmages are one of my favorites. And sometimes, I think in the very first campaign, I said, look, I've only got Archmages. I don't even have my Giants yet, but I think that my Archmages may be strong enough to carry me through. Low hit points, but they're very fast. But 12 attack, the bonus multiplier that they are going to get on enemy units is terrific. Absolutely spiffing. And you can curse them, and you're not going to lose a whole ton of damage. They're consistent. They're consistent in the actual damage that they're going to output in that way. But the modifier, the percent bonus damage, is usually going to be terrifically high. And that's why there's a big difference between attack skill and damage. If you just had damage, you're missing so much of the interaction that makes the game wonderful. Let's say that my 12 attack Archmage attacks I want to go down to the Goblin, the very first unit we looked at, to the 1 defense Goblin. 12 attack, 1 defense. Guess who's getting blown TF out? You're doing an extra 110 damage, and this is just base. This is without even taking into account what the heroes can do. Now, on the flip side, a barbarian with high defense, say that they pick up a lot of defense, and these goblins actually start to take reduced damage from some other creatures. You start to run into some pretty nifty things there as well. Anyway, the point was, don't sleep on these high output damage Archmages who are pretty much the exact opposite of Power Liches. Power Liches, again, with 13, 14 defense, but only 7 or 8 attack. Yeah, they're basically the exact opposite. Very interesting. We're not going to go into the neutral creatures. I did like this for the genies, because we have seen genies. We've had them in our units. Between the Paladin and the Phoenix in power, I thought that was very fair. Even though their hit points are lower than both of those units by a lot, being able to fly, I think, puts them above the Paladin, and then the damage puts them in the same class as the Phoenix. So I did think that was a good from the manual to say they're between the Paladins and the Phoenixes in power. Okay, I'm just going to wrap this up really quick. This was interesting to me. The total cost for all the barbarian structures is the least out of all the hero types, but they require an enormous amount of ore. A small amount of wood is needed, crystals at the highest level, and I start to add it up. Yeah, there's 5, 10, 20 wood, 10 ore, 25 wood, 15 ore. There's all of a sudden 35 ore total, 45 ore, and then you start to get into 65 ore just to start building most of your buildings. Nuts. 65 ore to get upgraded buildings and all your units. That's a lot of ore. The knights have the most structures and require vast amounts of wood. A small amount of ore is necessary as well. Crystal at the highest level. Yeah, if you've got a sawmill as a knight faction, you're going to buy pretty much everything that you need. Yeah, some of these other upgrades are going to cost the ore, but for the most part, 20 wood for the jousting arena and then 20 wood for the cathedral. Yeah, you need to really prioritize wood as the knights. Necromancers have some of the highest total resource costs. Few resources are required at the low levels, but many are required at the high levels. I started to scroll through this. I was like, oh, where does it start to get crazy? The upgrades. The mansion, 10 gems, 10 crystal, compared to like the knight faction, who's just ore and wood. Yeah, that can make a big difference. That's like 2 levels of mage guild right there. That's just to get the mansion upgrade. And then you start looking at the laboratory to build their top tier creature. Yeah, bone dragons might be pretty cheap at 1,500 gold per piece, but look at the cost. It's going to cost you a little bit of every single resource, and if you don't have a little bit of every single resource, yeah, that's going to delay a mage guild later as well. Sorceresses do require small amounts of wood and ore at early levels, gem and mercury at the highest levels. Yep, we've seen that before. Stonehenge is mercury, and then the fenced meadow is gems, and then of course the red tower is pretty high cost. Warlock is mostly gold, plus gems and sulfur and things like that. But most of their buildings cost more gold than all the other ones combined. But they do have the dungeon to help offset that. That extra 500 gold a day is going to come in really important for them. Crazy to me to think that you're going to need 15 gems to get your Minotaur Kings. I had no idea. I knew that they required gems for the upgraded version. It didn't even hit me that you're going to need 15 total to get the max level of Minotaurs. And then, yeah, the Black Tower. It is nice to know that to get Black Dragons is going to take a grand total of 40 sulfur to get there. That's good for everybody else who's not Warlock. Bad for the Warlocks themselves, but I'm sure that they're going to prioritize sulfur anyway. And then the Wizard, it surprised me that the highest resource cost of any town. And when I started scrolling through, I was like, well, where's this going to hit? And it's absolutely in the Ivory Tower. Look at the Ivory Tower. 5 wood, 5 ore, 5 crystals, 5 gems, 5 mercury, 5 sulfur. Yeah, mages and archmages are amazing, high damage multiplicative units, and yet they're very costly. So again, a little example of balance that maybe I wouldn't have noticed before. And then of course their tier 6 is ridiculous, ludicrously expensive. 40 gems, I guess that's on par with the 40 sulfur it takes to get Black Dragons. And then from here, there's just some talk about the editor, and not a whole lot else. I do want to point out that I may have made a mistake with the keyboard shortcuts. A lot of these keyboard shortcuts were available in the original Heroes of Might and Magic 2. I think that as a child, I was just unaware of them. Nice to see that there have been some additional, hotkeys being brought into the modern era, and also being able to adjust them was huge. So I still stand by what I said. FHeroes did a great job of adding to what was already here with that. I do like that we should probably send a fax to this number just to see if anybody will respond for customer support. I know 3DO went out of business a long time ago, but just nifty. Okay, that's all I'm going to talk to you about. Maybe I'll talk to you about the price of loyalty, the expansion, tips and tricks and things later. But for now, get out of here. FixFox out.